Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. This is Taliesin McKnight, and today's subject is the Great Work. What is the Great Work? What does this mean? And where did it come from? The Great Work refers to self-transformation, self-change. And this term is thrown around in Rosicrucianism, Thelema, the Theosophical Society. It's used a lot in Hermetic Qabalah. So this term, the Great Work, is used a lot, and it refers to self-transformation. Now, here in a moment, I'll talk about methods and techniques for self-transformation. Part of this involves bringing repressed aspects of the psyche to the surface. So, bringing up repressed material in the psyche in order to reach wholeness and all of that. Self-actualization. Also, this has to do with changing your self-concept, your own self-image, so that we all have this idea of who we are. And if we could change our own self-concept, then we could be the person that we want to be in this world. So, self-transformation. There are a lot of techniques and tools that are used for this. Now, and also I'll get into the chariot allegory and things like that. Now, first of all, where did this come from? This comes from alchemy. Today we have modern chemistry, dealing with chemicals and all of that chemistry. Back in the old days, it was alchemy. Alchemy became modern chemistry. Now, back in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, back in the 1500s, 1600s, alchemists would try to turn lead into gold. So they tried to make gold. They would try to take metals like copper, tin, brass, lead, and they would try to turn this into gold. So a lot of people tried to get rich off of alchemy. If they could figure out how to turn steel into gold, then they could get rich. Now, this was symbolic of self-transformation, self-change. This philosophy was going all around Europe in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and then you have Rosicrucianism. So this was a pretty big deal back in the Middle Ages and in the Renaissance. And this idea of turning lead into gold, which is yourself, turning your own self into gold, transforming yourself, this concept has trickled down into the general New Age, occult, esoteric community. So that is what the Great Work or Magnum Opus refers to. Self-change, self-transformation. Now, the first thing I would like to talk about is the self-concept. Your self-image or self-concept, this is our own concept of who we are. We've created this idea of ourselves. That's not really debatable. That's just a psychological fact. We all have this self-concept, this idea of who we are. Now, if you could change your own self-concept, then you can change yourself, essentially. So if you change how you see yourself, then it can create an actual change. Some people suffer from negative hypnotic self-imaging. They have bad self-image. They see themselves in a negative light. Now, the idea is that you can change your own self-image and make real changes in your personality. The idea is that you are the base metal. You turn yourself into gold. You can be the person you want to be. Self-transformation, self-change. Now, there are different techniques for this. In previous videos, I have a whole list of videos I made on self-hypnosis, how to hypnotize yourself for success, conscious autosuggestion. If you repeat something over and over and over, this creates changes in your own self-image, self-hypnosis, things like that. Now, another aspect of this has to do with bringing repressed aspects of your own psyche to the surface. Now, what do I mean by this? When something is repressed, it means we push it down. We don't acknowledge it in ourselves. For example, we all have an inner masculine, inner feminine, so that all men are said to have a feminine side, all women have a masculine side. Jungian psychology refers to this as the anima and the animus. So part of reaching wholeness is for a man to get in touch with his sensitivity, things like that. So, another example of repression, someone that's overly nice all the time, that is a defense mechanism that they built up to interact with the world. People that are overly nice, they're not assertive enough. That part of them is repressed. Someone that acts tough all the time, they have this inner sensitivity that they have repressed. So, if you look at the psyche as this circle, and you cut that circle in half, this part of ourselves that we show to the world and we acknowledge, that's our conscious self. But then we have all these repressed things that we don't acknowledge in ourselves. For example, someone that is just overly sensitive, they have this harsher, dominant aspect of themselves. It's just not brought to the surface. So part of self-change has to do with reaching wholeness by bringing repressed aspects of the psyche to the surface. And also we have parts of ourselves that we don't acknowledge, we don't want to acknowledge, such as weaknesses, things like that. We all have repressed sexual urges, repressed memories and fears. And so below our conscious level, we have all this unconscious material that is below the surface. Now, part of reaching individuation or wholeness is to bring all of this to the surface. And this is what the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung called the process of individuation. So, as you could see, part of self-transformation, the great work, has to do with changing your self-concept and in reintegrating repressed material in the psyche. Now, there has to be a balance between these. For example, if you're trying to do self-change, self-transformation, and you go out there in the world and you're trying to be this person, when we're trying to change ourselves, we usually repress what we don't want. Okay? So you have a balance here. If you're trying to mold yourself to be the person I want to be, this is who I am, we push down what we don't want. And this makes it worse. So how do you bring this stuff to the surface while changing? Carl Jung talked about the use of dreams. If you write down your dreams, simply acknowledging that aspect of yourself is a release. So this all goes back to know yourself. At the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, there was it was written, "Know thyself." So self-knowledge is part of self-transformation. Now, part of this also has to do with self-mastery and self-conquest. Now, here in a moment, I'll go into the whole mystical part, but right now I'm talking about the basics. So self-conquest, mastering yourself, being able to master your own passions and things like that. Most people try to change the outside world. Most people try to change the outside world, but very few people actually work on themselves, try to create an inner change. And the idea is that if you could change yourself, change begins with yourself, then it'll be easier to interact with the world and have a better life. Things like that. Now, talking about self-mastery. Oh, by the way, I was using modern Jungian psychology terms of your inner feminine, inner masculine, your inner sensitivity, repressed urges and fears, things that's not at the surface that you bring to the surface. That's Jungian psychology. But I'm using a modern psychological terminology. This is really a much older idea. Self-mastery. Self-mastery. This is another very ancient concept. Plato, around 2,500 years ago, had what he called the chariot allegory. The chariot allegory of the soul. Plato, who some people believe was taught by Socrates. Did Socrates really exist, or did Plato make him up? Plato talks about the chariot allegory of the soul. He has a white horse and a black horse. The black horse represents our own passions and desires, while the white horse has to do with our reason, things like that. And he talks about controlling the horses, our own inner forces, and how the chariot would ascend and we try to go up towards heaven and then we're pulled back down because we can't control our own passions. We are enslaved by our desires, our cravings, things like that. Now, the chariot allegory of the soul, which is 2,500 years old, Plato's allegory, this is the exact same image that you see on the chariot tarot card in most decks. So that's interesting. 2,500 years ago, Plato had the same image as on the chariot card. That's interesting. So self-mastery, self-conquest. Aleister Crowley talked about mastering the three beasts, which are body, mind, and emotions. Mastering yourself, mastering your own cravings, things like that. Back in, about 2,000 years ago, Gnosticism talked about ascending through the spheres, the seven spheres, seven planets, different aspects of ourselves. And Hermeticism had the same concept. If you go to India, yoga talks about self-mastery. You have the different yoga positions, things like that, controlling your mind with meditation. So this idea you find in India, you find it in Egypt with Hermeticism, you find it in Gnostic teachings, you find it in Buddhism. So all these traditions around the world talk about mastering your passions. Now, this idea isn't very popular for some reason. For some odd reason, most people don't like the idea of actually working on themselves. And most people damn sure aren't happy with actually not getting what they want intentionally. Sirs and madams, what I'm talking about today is actually self-dominion, self-conquest. And people talk about freedom. Are you really free? Do you really have liberty when you're enslaved to your desires and passions? The idea is that true freedom is not being bound by the instinctual forces of nature. To transcend nature, if man is meant to be a supreme pontiff of nature, then he must first have self-conquest, self-dominion. Oedipus Rex, Oedipus. Many of us know the Greek tragedy of Oedipus Rex. Again, this was written quite a while back. Oedipus became king of Thebes, and of course the story says he slept with his own mother and killed his father. Horrible Greek tragedy. Now Oedipus, how did he become king? Well, he solved the riddle of the Sphinx. This is a very old tale. Many people are familiar with Oedipus. I had to learn about this crap in my literature class in college a while back. Anyways, he solved the riddle of the Sphinx in this story. Now, a Sphinx is a composite creature that has often a human face. It often incorporates different animal parts, such as a lion, bull, eagle, and a man. Of course, these are the four living creatures of the Apocalypse and Revelations, the book of Ezekiel, the four living creatures, and these are also symbols of the fixed signs of the zodiac. So that's interesting. Anyways, so the riddle of the Sphinx was, what crawls on four legs in the morning? Now, what walks on four legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 at night? The answer to the riddle of the Sphinx is man. Because when we're children, we crawl on all fours. At noon, adulthood, we walk on 2 legs. And in old age, at sunset, we have a cane, so 3 legs. The solution to the riddle is man. Now, anyways, I'm kind of going off. Damn it, that was supposed to be tied to what I was saying. Anyways, the Sphinx is a composite creature, represents earth, air, fire, and water. These are different aspects of ourselves. Aleister Crowley talked about mastering ourselves, yoga, and all of that. A supreme pontiff of nature, actually mastering our own cravings and things like that. And this is about transcending the forces of nature and actually being able to master yourself. So that's interesting. So basically, and now I will get into the more mystical aspects, the great work refers to self-transformation, self-change. Sometimes it just means becoming this person you want to be, successful and happy. Usually it refers to something much more exalted and spiritual, such as union with the divine, things like that. Now there are methods. For one thing, self-knowledge, bringing repressed material to the surface. If you change your self-concept, then you could change who you are. Okay? Balance. And then you have enlightenment. Things like that. Now, usually, when people refer to the great work, they talk about union with God. Or reaching enlightenment, okay? Now, this is a very important concept in mysticism. You know, there's a lot of religious people, and they worship God, stuff like that. Now, mysticism usually refers to union with God. People that are so close to God that they lose who they are, and they're sort of absorbed in God. Now, I know that this sounds like an out there concept to many people, but this is the whole idea of yoga. The word yoga means union. It's the whole purpose of yoga. Here in the West, people sit around and do their yoga positions. They don't know that the whole purpose of yoga is union with God. Buddhism is about enlightenment. Different religions teach this. Christianity, you have certain mystics. A lot of times they're actually considered saints, like St. John of the Cross. These are mystics. Every religion on the planet has some form of mysticism. So, the idea is if you could reach enlightenment, if you could somehow become absorbed in the Godhead. Some people believe in this. Aleister Crowley talks about union with the all. So, this has to do with a reception. If you reach self-perfection and have a closeness to the divine, then you could merge with the divine. This is done in different ways. It could be done through devotion. Now that's something that's often missing in Western esoteric circles. A lot of people, it's all in their head, all these things they learn, but they don't really have that connection. So anyways, the great work usually refers to enlightenment, things like that. Breaking down our own belief system, seeing the truth, things like that, awakening. Now in the process of self-knowledge, you gradually have an awakening, in a sense. So anyways, bringing repressed. Now this whole union, the great work is always, I have to say this, it's always a union of opposites. Okay, a union of opposites. In alchemy, the great work was often represented by a hermaphroditic figure that's male and female. What the hell does this mean? The great work in alchemy shows a man-woman. This represents, like I said, a man reaching his inner feminine, a woman reaching her inner masculine. That's obvious. Opposites. If someone's real sensitive and crying all the time, they have this aggressive, assertive part of themselves. It's just repressed. You have to bring it to the surface to reach wholeness. If someone's like some dude in the Army or the Marine Corps that's, oh, he's tough, or if you're in prison, you can't act very sensitive if you want to survive. The point is, they have the sensitive part they're repressing. So that's the union of opposites, bringing repressed material to the psyche. Of course, Carl Jung studied a little bit of alchemy, or so I've heard. Also, it has to do with union between the microcosm, the individual, and the macrocosm, which is the cosmos, the universe. It is boundary dissolution. Boundary dissolution, or union between man and God. So these are all different ways that the great work refers to the union of opposites. Notice the Magan star shows two interlocked triangles. Freemasonry has a square and a compass. Rosicrucianism has a cross, which is phallic, and a rose, which is yonic. So male and female sexual symbolism is found throughout the Zohar and the Qabalah. The Tree of Life deals with the two pillars of Jachin and Boaz. The two pillars are found in Freemasonry. So Rosicrucianism talks about turning lead into gold. Freemasonry talks about you have a rough stone and hewing away at its imperfections until you have the perfect stone. So Freemasonry talks about taking away imperfections. So different traditions. The great work, in my opinion, is the center of Buddhism, yoga, most mystical traditions, even though this term is usually used in Western esoteric tradition. Now, where does this all come from? This idea is thousands of years old. This concept, we know for a fact that all these ideas I talked about go back at least 2,000 years. Where? Well, to Egypt, of course. You had Hermeticism, which was a union of Greek and Egyptian philosophy. This goes back 2,000 years to Alexandrian Egypt. We have Hermetic writings, so we know that is a fact. And Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, all of this trickled down through the Middle Ages, and it trickled down in the Renaissance, and then you had all these alchemists, and then Rosicrucianism, and it trickled down into the modern occult movement. The word occult means hidden. It is a hidden knowledge that goes back thousands of years. That's what the occult is, and it's everything that the Catholic Church tried to suppress. Now, what happens when you try to suppress something? It becomes hidden. Now, today, everyone's out in the open. I'm a tarot reader, I'm an astrologer, whatever the hell. Anyways, so the great work is self-transformation, self-change. And it usually has to do with the union of opposites, male and female. The person you show to the world, the person that is suppressed. Boundary dissolution between the microcosm and the macrocosm. That's basically it. Anyways, thank you for joining me. And once again, this is Taliesin McKnight. Have a great day, y'all. Oh, it is also represented by the Hebrew letter Aleph. The two yuds on each side. It's the Hebrew letter, first letter. This is a hieroglyph that kind of shows this same concept. And then again, it might give just one other perspective of the phrase as above, so below. Anyways, thank you for joining me, and have a great day, y'all.